I never thought that a simple photograph could change my whole life. It ended up being at the center of events that spiraled everything around so quickly that I barely had time to grasp what was happening. It happened last Saturday. We were standing next to Mr. Olivier, the director of Marshall and Associates, smiling for the camera. His hand firmly shook mine, and the photographer captured the moment. Under the photo, I wrote, "Finally got promoted. Hard work pays off." It seemed like just a social media update, something ordinary, fleeting. But how wrong I was. My name is Marilyn, I'm 24 years old, and I had just started to truly enjoy the taste of success. That day, after posting, I felt proud of myself. 4 years ago, I started working at Marshall and Associates in an entry-level position. Back then, I was inexperienced, naive, and full of hope. 4 years filled with sleepless nights, countless presentations, and coffee in such quantities that its taste started to feel metallic. And now, finally, I had climbed to the next level. I was now a department head. This was my first major success. I did it on my own, and it meant everything to me. I was still writing about my feelings, struggling to find the words to express my excitement, when the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but my heart tightened. A voice that was too familiar came from the other end of the line, soft, deceptively warm. "Marilyn, sweetheart, it's Mom," she said. Those two words sounded like an echo from the past. 8 years. 8 long years since I had heard her voice. And now, suddenly, without warning, she decided to call. "We just saw your post," Mom continued, "and we are so proud of you." Those words cut through me like a knife. Proud? Where was their pride when I really needed it? I struggled to keep my voice calm. "Thank you." My fingers gripped the edge of the table so tightly that my nails turned white. "We should celebrate," Mom said, her voice taking on a slightly more upbeat tone. "Come this weekend, we'll throw a party. The whole family will be happy to see how successful you are." Family. A word that should have sounded cozy and warm, but to me, it became a stone. They wanted me to come back. After 8 years of silence, distance, and indifference. After everything that had happened. I barely managed to respond, "I'll think about it." But Mom didn't give up. "Please do, darling. It's time to leave the past behind. Don't you think?" The polite tone, the caring words, it all seemed so fake. I knew that on the other side of the line, there wasn't love, but the intention to present the world with a perfect image, in which the successful daughter became a new element of their pride. After the call, I sat at my desk, staring into space. My heart was beating too fast. 8 years. 8 years of silence, interrupted by one photograph. 8 years since I left their house, promising myself I'd never go back. 8 years spent creating my life without their involvement. I raised my hand and touched the bracelet on my wrist, the medical bracelet that warned of my severe peanut allergy. An allergy that my parents always considered more of an inconvenience than a real problem. My younger sister Madison made cruel jokes about it. I closed my eyes, recalling my grandmother's words, which always gave me comfort. "Family is not those who share your blood, but those who treat you as their own." She was my real family. Only Grandma believed in me when no one else did. She was there, supporting me when I was at my lowest. It was her voice I heard in those moments when my strength was running out. Her words, "I'm proud of you," were sincere, not just an empty courtesy. I looked at the photograph on my desk. It was of me and Grandma on the day I graduated from college. She was smiling, and her eyes shone with pride. Real pride. Not the kind that comes after a successful social media post, but the kind that grows from love, care, and faith. I remembered how she hugged me when they handed me my diploma, how she said I was her pride. At that moment, I truly felt loved. And now my mother, who had ignored my efforts for years, suddenly decided that I was worthy of their attention. Because I got promoted. Because now I was successful. It all felt so wrong, so painful. But despite everything, deep inside, a doubt flickered. Maybe they had changed. Maybe this really was a chance for reconciliation. Or am I just fooling myself, trying to find something that was never there? Memories flooded in, one after another, like a wave lifting the debris of the past to the surface. The day I left their house was the hardest day of my life, but it marked the beginning of my new chapter. The years I spent away from them weren't easy, but I grew stronger. I built my life without relying on anyone else. And now they wanted me to come back. My fingers found the bracelet on my wrist, and I gripped it tighter, as if it could give me strength. It's time to leave the past behind. Those words echoed in my head. But is that even possible? Can you forget all the hurts, the betrayal, the indifference? I slowly got up from the desk, trying to organize my thoughts. My heart was telling me to stay where I was safe. But my mind whispered that this conversation couldn't be put off forever. The decision I make now could change everything. The past crashed over me like waves, pounding at my consciousness harder with each passing second. Picture after picture, memories pushed the present aside, and I was no longer sitting at my desk. I was that girl again, hoping to earn at least a glance of approval, at least a scrap of attention. I was 11 at the time. My birthday, the day when even the busiest parents find time to make it special for their child. I remember how I stared for hours at an art set in the shop window. Simple, unadorned, but to me it seemed magical. The colored pencils were neatly arranged in the box, and the album with snow-white pages seemed to be waiting for my drawings. I couldn't think of anything else, and I was sure that Mom and Dad would notice how excited I was about it. When I unwrapped the gift that day, my heart froze for a moment in anticipation. But instead of the coveted set, I found a pack of regular number 2 pencils in my hands. "You'll need these for school anyway," Mom said indifferently, already moving on to something more important. I didn't cry. I just lowered my eyes, trying to hide my disappointment. Only a few months later, on Madison's 8th birthday, my parents turned the backyard into a fairy tale wonderland. Everything shimmered in pink and gold tones. A princess costume, balloons, even entertainers. The whole day was dedicated to her. She laughed and twirled and danced, basking in admiration, while I stood aside, feeling like an outsider. Even then, my parents explained everything simply: Madison is special. She needs the right environment to develop her talents. Those words haunted me for a long time. Every time I showed my progress in school or shared my achievements, their reactions seemed to say, "You don't need attention. You'll manage on your own." I tried, really. I won first place in the state math competition. Pride swelled within me, and I thought, this is it. Now they'll see. But all I heard from Mom was, "That's nice, dear, but have you seen Madison's painting? It's now hanging in the school hallway." It was as if, with each passing year, the distance between us became more noticeable. The harder I tried, the less they noticed me. Madison, on the other hand, quickly mastered the art of manipulation. Her tears instantly erased any accusations. If something went wrong, she always found a way to make me the guilty one. A broken vase? It was my fault for tripping. Spilled juice on my homework? She just accidentally knocked it over. And, of course, my parents always believed her. I remember once Madison telling her friends not to play with me. "She's boring," she laughed, and I stood aside, feeling another piece of my heart break. Her words were small, but their sharpness cut deeper than any scream. My efforts went unnoticed even when I got into the advanced math program. Instead, my parents proudly boasted about Madison's role in the school play. They chose her performance, while I was left sitting alone in the math class during the award ceremony. I watched as the parents of other kids beamed with pride, trying not to feel jealous. My certificate with the principal's signature went unnoticed. These memories gripped my heart with an iron fist. Not only the events themselves, but also the feelings they left behind. The sense of being unnecessary, of loneliness, of feeling invisible in my own family. Even my grandmother, seeing this, couldn't change their perspective. She tried to talk to Mom, reminding her that children should be loved equally. But they just brushed it off, thinking their actions were justified. Marilyn is fine, she's ordinary, Mom would say with such certainty, as if she had stamped my individuality with a cross. It wasn't a compliment, it was a sentence. I was merely the background on which Madison's star shone. But despite all the bitterness of these memories, I knew they made me stronger. At some point, I stopped trying to please them and started living for myself. It wasn't easy. Every step forward felt like a battle, but it was through those battles that I achieved what I have now. My gaze fell again on the photo with my grandmother. Her faith in me was always unwavering. She saw the real me, the one who deserved just as much as anyone else. Grandma was my anchor of stability when the whole world seemed chaotic. Her words echoed in my memory, "You are more than they think." Never forget that. And I didn't forget. That's why I was able to build my life, step by step, proving that I could achieve more. But was it worth returning to the place I had been running from for so long? Was it worth giving these people another chance to hurt me? I will never forget the day I learned about my allergy. The peanut butter sandwich I once loved became a threat to me. I remember sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table, eagerly waiting for her to finish her usual routine. She carefully spread a thick layer of peanut butter on the bread, then covered it with a thin layer of honey, adding that sweetness that made the sandwich unique. At first, everything was as usual. But then I felt my throat start to tighten, my breath grew heavier, and everything before my eyes became blurry. My body betrayed me. The sandwich fell from my hands, and I grabbed my throat, trying to breathe in even a little air. The world began to fade, but I remember how my grandmother rushed to me. Her voice was both calm and full of worry. She held my hand, her strength and determination were the only anchor in that whirlpool of panic. "Hang in there, darling, just breathe," she said, while dialing the emergency number. Those words stayed with me for life. They weren't just comfort, but a promise that I wasn't alone in this world. Grandma saved me that day, and it wasn't the last time. When my parents arrived at the hospital an hour later, they didn't seem concerned. Irritation was evident on their faces, as if I had purposely chosen the most inconvenient moment to face this new challenge. Mom, tapping her foot, barely listened to the doctor explaining how serious my allergy was. "Now she'll have to carry an EpiPen with her at all times," he said, "and check every food label carefully." But her attention was already on her phone. She was probably making excuses to Madison's dance teacher for being late. Dad, as always, was brief, "We'll deal with this." But his words meant nothing. In the car, on the way home, they made it clear how they truly felt about the situation. "Just wonderful," Mom muttered. "First, tutoring in math, and now this. You really like to complicate everything, don't you, Marilyn?" These words cut deeper than the tightening of my throat. From then on, my life became a strict routine, constant label checking, wearing a medical bracelet, and carrying an EpiPen. Grandma was the only one who took it seriously. She didn't just watch over me, she taught me how to live with it. She explained to my teachers why I couldn't eat from shared containers. She called the school and demanded that special food be provided in the cafeteria. Madison, of course, found a new way to humiliate me. Her favorite game was to wave peanut butter sandwiches in front of me, watching as I backed away. "Oh, sorry," she would say with feigned regret. "I forgot you're allergic to everything now." At family gatherings, she would shout for everyone to "be careful, because I might die from a random bite. Everyone laughed, thinking it was just a joke, but I knew for her it was a way to stand out, even at the expense of my life. My parents never stopped her. They saw her antics as harmless fun. And if anything went wrong, I was told that I was too sensitive. "You need to be independent, Marilyn," Dad would say. "You'll manage." This wasn't a compliment. It was their excuse. If I could handle things on my own, why invest in me? Even when relatives noticed how I was being pushed aside, my parents brushed it off. "Our girls are just different," Mom would explain with indifferent certainty. It became their mantra. Different. Madison was special, and I was ordinary. That seemed to be enough for them to justify everything. Life in the family became a battle I no longer wanted to fight. With each passing day, I understood more clearly, love and care aren't something you have to earn, they should be given unconditionally. But despite all this, Grandma was the light in the darkness for me. She supported me when everyone else turned away. She told me that I didn't have to be the way they wanted me to be. "You don't have to prove that you deserve love, Marilyn," she would repeat. "You already deserve it." Those words became my shield. They helped me endure when Madison came up with a new joke or when my parents looked right through me, failing to notice my achievements. They gave me the strength to walk away when I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. But the past is a strange thing. It always finds a way to come back. One phone call, one photo, one word, and all the barriers you've built over the years begin to crumble. The question is whether you have the strength to stand your ground when the wave comes crashing back. Mom's words echoed in my ears, as if someone had slammed a door loudly, leaving me on the outside. "You're always causing problems. You always complicate everything." These accusations cut into me like a knife, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had hidden my feelings for too long, swallowing every offense, resigning myself to their injustice. I looked at Grandma. Her face showed a mixture of anger and disappointment. It was a rare moment when I felt someone, other than myself, saw the truth. Saw how they had kept me in the shadows for years, how my accomplishments were devalued just to praise Madison once again. And finally, someone had decided to speak up about it. But even that didn't move my parents from their steadfast position. Madison, naturally, took advantage of the situation, turning on her usual tactic of tears. Her loud sobs filled the room. She theatrically covered her face with her hands, crying loudly as if she had just been accused of a crime. "How can you be so mean to me?" she moaned, skillfully directing the blame at Grandma and me. Mom immediately rushed to her, hugging her and saying, "They just don't understand, sweetie. Everything will be okay." Dad stood nearby, his face tense with irritation. His silence spoke louder than words. He wasn't going to intervene or change anything. I felt the tension building inside me, like a spring about to snap. I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to fall. In that moment, more than anything, I just wanted to leave, to escape this room, this house, this family that so clearly saw me as nothing more than a burden. But Grandma didn't back down. Her gaze was firm, her voice cold as an icy wind. "Camilla, John, you don't understand what you're doing. You're raising a child who thinks she can do anything, and ignoring another daughter who deserves your love just as much. It's unfair. And it's tearing your family apart." Madison, sensing the seriousness in Grandma's tone, quickly tried to defuse the situation. She wiped her tears, glanced at our parents, and said, "I didn't mean anything bad. It was just a joke." Doesn't Marilyn understand jokes? Her voice was sweet and innocent, but I knew that tone too well. It was as fake as her tears. A joke? Grandma narrowed her eyes, her voice turning even colder. If that's a joke, then I'm afraid to think how far she might go when she starts acting seriously. She turned her gaze to me. "Marilyn, Darling, you don't have to put up with this. You deserve more. These words felt like they broke the dam inside me. I took a deep breath and finally spoke. My voice was hoarse but confident. I really deserve more. I deserve a family that supports me, not humiliates me. I deserve parents who see me as a person, not a burden. And if I can't get that here, I will find it elsewhere. The words hung in the air, as if everyone was trying to comprehend their meaning. Grandma looked at me with pride, my parents with shock, and Madison with feigned surprise. She even opened her mouth to say something, but I raised my hand to stop her. Don't bother. I'm too tired of your jokes. Standing up from the table, I felt my legs weaken, but the inner fire kept me from falling. Grandma, thank you for everything. For being the only one who's always been on my side. But I can't stay here anymore. She nodded, her eyes shining with the tears she was trying to hold back. I'll support you, Marilyn, whatever you decide. Mom jumped up from her seat. What are you trying to say, Marilyn? You want to leave us? After everything we've done for you? I turned to her, my voice calm but firm. You've done enough. Enough for me to understand that I'm not valued or loved here. This is my choice. Dad crossed his arms over his chest, his face like stone. If you leave, don't come back. We're saving for Madison, and we don't have extra funds to support you when you decide you need it after all. I smirked. It was so predictable. Don't worry, I don't need anything from you. I've achieved everything on my own, and I will continue to do so. With those words, I left the room. Behind me, I could hear my parents' voices, trying to maintain control of the situation, and Madison's whining sobs. But I no longer listened. I went up to my room, pulled the suitcase out from under the bed, and started packing. Grandma appeared at the door a few minutes later. Pack everything you need, darling. We'll go to my place. You'll be better off there. Her voice was calm, but I could see she was also tired of this endless struggle. We left the house half an hour later. My parents and Madison didn't even bother to see us off. Their absence only strengthened my confidence in the correctness of my decision. From that day on, I decided that I would never again allow myself to be ignored. I would never allow myself to be humiliated. This was my first step toward real freedom. These 3 weeks dragged on like years. My life, usually strict and orderly, suddenly became filled with a strange mix of memories, doubts, and new realities. Every morning, like clockwork, I received messages from Mom with details about the party preparations. She described everything down to the smallest details, the menu, the guest list, even the color schemes for the decorations. Your favorite shades, Marilyn, everything will look perfect, she wrote. Those words seemed so out of place, like they belonged to someone else's life. Madison, who seemed to have forgotten about my existence for years, suddenly decided to remind me of herself. Her friend request on social media was both unexpected and ridiculous. It's time to leave the past behind, read the message accompanying the request. I stared at the screen, wondering how to respond. Perhaps someone else would have seen this as a gesture of reconciliation, but I knew her motives were rarely sincere. I didn't accept the request. Instead, I closed the app and tried to focus on work. But my thoughts kept drifting back to the upcoming event. Why were they doing this? Why, after 8 years of silence, did they suddenly want to celebrate my success? Doubts and suspicion spread inside me like a web. Finally, the day of the party arrived. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my blouse. Simple, elegant attire, nothing too flashy. I didn't want to attract more attention than necessary. Deep down, I knew this day would be a test. A test of my resilience, my self-confidence, and my ability to withstand the pressure of the past. When I pulled up to my parents' house, my heart tightened. Everything looked the same as the day I left. The cream-colored walls, the impeccably manicured lawn, the brass door knocker. Nothing had changed, except that inside me now was more strength than there had been back then. Mom opened the door. Her smile was strained, but her eyes gleamed with a strange mix of joy and tension. "Marilyn, darling. You look wonderful," she exclaimed, pulling me into an embrace. Her arms were stiff, almost mechanical, as if it wasn't a genuine emotion but a rehearsal. The living room had a festive atmosphere. Guests had already begun to gather, Aunt Marjorie with her ever-present gloves, cousins I barely recognized, and even familiar faces from my distant childhood. But my eyes immediately went to the mantel. Above it, proudly displayed, hung Madison's diploma, the centerpiece of the room, a reminder that in this house, there had always been only one child worthy of pride. Madison was sitting in Dad's old chair, phone in hand. Her face showed no sign of interest in my arrival. Only when Mom loudly announced, "Let's welcome our star, Marilyn," did she glance up, rolling her eyes as if it were a burden. Mom continued speaking, loudly and excitedly, as if it were her own triumph. "We're so proud of you, darling," she began. "A promotion at your age. It's incredible." Her voice trembled with enthusiasm, but I felt that her words rang hollow, as if she were reading from a pre-written script. Dad, sitting on the sofa, merely nodded briefly, impressive. That would have been enough for someone else to feel supported, but from him, it sounded more like an obligation than genuine praise. Then Mom took the initiative, starting to talk about the party. "We've invited everyone you know, even Aunt Marjorie. We want to make things right, Marilyn. It's been too long." Her voice was sweet, almost apologetic, but there was still a hint of self-assurance in it. It was as if she already knew that I would accept this as a given. I nodded, unable to come up with anything else to say. Guests started coming up to congratulate me, asking questions about work, inquiring about how I was managing the new position. But I felt out of place, as if someone had placed me in a chair that was too soft to escape from. Madison didn't come up to me. She stayed in her chair, detached, scrolling through her phone as if nothing was happening. But her eyes occasionally slid over to me. There was no warmth in her gaze, more like something predatory, like a cat watching the movement of a mouse. Mom approached me, taking my hand. "Darling, we have an idea," she began, her voice growing even brighter. "What do you think about helping Madison? Maybe getting her into your company? She's incredibly talented. Imagine how great that would be." I stood there in a daze, staring into her shining eyes. She spoke with such enthusiasm, as if it wasn't a suggestion but a foregone conclusion. I felt something tighten inside me. So that was why all this was happening. That's why they suddenly remembered me. This party wasn't for me. It was for them to use my success as a platform to promote their golden child. I took a deep breath, trying not to let my anger take over. "Mom, I can't make decisions like that." "It's not within my purview," I replied, trying to keep my calm. Mom hesitated, but her gaze remained firm. "Well, you could talk to someone. You have influence now." I could feel the wave of protest rising within me. This wasn't an attempt to mend things, not an attempt to apologize for the past. It was just another way to corner me, to make me play by their rules. I smiled, but it was a tight smile. "Sorry, Mom, but I can't promise anything like that. My position doesn't allow me to make those kinds of decisions, and besides, it wouldn't be quite right." Her face tensed. I saw her eyes narrow for a moment, but she quickly put on an overly cheerful mask. "Of course, darling, I understand. It was just an idea." But her voice had turned colder. That, "I understand," felt like an empty formality, signaling that this conversation would come up again. I stepped aside, trying to hide from the new influx of guests. Madison finally got up from her chair and came over to us. She stood next to Mom, chin held high. Her dress was the kind that couldn't be ignored, bright, provocative, practically shouting, "Look at me." "How's everything at your company?" she asked, stretching the words. Her tone was both condescending and cold. "You're so important there. You haven't forgotten who you really are, have you?" I looked at her, and for a moment, it felt like we were kids again. Madison, the same self-satisfied girl trying hard to show her superiority, and me, the one who was constantly devalued, no matter how much effort I put in. But things were different now. I wasn't that girl anymore. "Madison," I replied, trying to speak calmly, "if you're really interested in my work, I can tell you about it. But I think you're more interested in saying something than hearing it." She snorted. "Well, you're right. I'm not really interested. I just thought maybe you finally learned something useful." Her voice was so venomous that I almost found it amusing. The old tactic, to humiliate in order to feel better. But I wasn't the one who would shrink from her words anymore. "I've learned a lot, Madison. For example, I've learned how important it is to stay away from toxic people," I said, looking her straight in the eye. Her face contorted with indignation, but she quickly turned away, unable to respond. Mom, who had been watching our exchange, nervously laughed. "Girls, let's not fight. It's a celebration, right?" "Of course," I replied, without even looking at her. My attention was drawn to Aunt Marjorie, who gestured for me to come over. She was standing in the corner of the room, her gaze full of sympathy, and a soft smile played on her lips. I made my way toward her, grateful for the chance to escape the lingering tension. "Marilyn, you're amazing," she said when I reached her. "I know how hard this must be for you." "Thank you, Aunt Marjorie," I replied, feeling her words wrap around me like a warm blanket. We started talking, and her presence was calming. She asked about my work, about life, and for the first time that evening, I felt like I could be myself. But at some point, I noticed that we were being watched. Mom, Madison, and even Dad, they were all looking at us, as though expecting something to happen. Madison was the first to break. She crossed the room and stopped next to us. "Marilyn, I think you owe Mom and Dad an apology. They've done so much for you, and here you are acting like a queen." Aunt Marjorie raised an eyebrow. Her face took on that expression I always thought of as her trademark, a mix of surprise and subtle sarcasm. "Madison, darling, are you really the one talking about gratitude?" Madison was taken aback, but quickly recovered. "I just think Marilyn could be a bit more grateful. She's so important now, right?" I couldn't take it anymore. "You know, Madison, I am grateful. Grateful to Grandma for believing in me when no one else did. Grateful to myself for getting through all of this. But if you think I should be thanking our parents for making me invisible, you're mistaken." The room fell silent. All eyes were on us. Mom tried to say something, but her voice got lost in the quiet. I exhaled, feeling the tension leave me. "Thanks for the party," I said, addressing everyone. "But I think it's time for me to go." My back was straight as I walked toward the door. Behind me, voices began to rise, but I no longer listened. Outside the door, the cool night awaited. I looked up at the stars, breathed in the cold air, and felt the freedom I had longed for. "Selfish," I whispered to myself, feeling the word echo inside, tearing away the last remnants of restraint. My voice trembled, but I didn't let myself stop. "You talk about helping the family, but where was that help when I really needed it? Where were you when I was fighting for my place in this world? You never acknowledged my achievements, but now that I succeeded, you suddenly remembered I exist. And all of this to help Madison? This isn't care for the family. It's manipulation." Mom flared up, her face turning red. "How can you say that, Marilyn? We've always supported you." I bitterly smiled, barely believing my own ears. Supported? You didn't even come to my awards ceremony when I won the state math competition. You said you had more important things to do. Is that your idea of support? Dad, who had been standing off to the side, finally spoke up. His tone was icy. We did everything we could. You always had a roof over your head, food to eat, we provided for you. Maybe you forget how much effort it takes to raise children. You were only concerned with raising one child, I retorted, looking him straight in the eye. It was always about Madison, her successes, her talents, her needs. I was just a shadow, and you didn't even try to hide it. Madison walked into the kitchen, her eyes narrowed, lips stretched into a smug smile. Marilyn, maybe you should stop dramatizing. You've always been so sensitive. This is just ridiculous. You're a successful, independent woman, right? What more could you possibly need? I felt my heart tighten with anger, but I held myself back. I took a deep breath before responding. I don't need anything more, Madison. But you, apparently, need my help, or else it's hard to understand why you organized this party. Mom abruptly turned to me. Her voice trembled with tension. We wanted to make you happy, we wanted to fix the past. And this is how you talk to us. Fix the past. You didn't even try. I exclaimed, no longer hiding my emotions. You didn't care about my life for 8 years, Mom. 8 years of complete silence. And suddenly, when I get a promotion, you decide it's time? This isn't about fixing relationships. This is about using me. Madison took a step forward, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Of course, Marilyn is suffering again. She's back in the spotlight. As always, the whole world must bend to her grievances. Enough, came a firm voice from the doorway. Grandma stood on the threshold of the kitchen. Her eyes were shining with restrained anger. Madison, you've crossed the line. Marilyn has every right to feel what she feels. You, Camilla, and you, John, deprived her of what every child should have, love and support. And now, you're trying to use her, instead of apologizing. Mom's face turned even redder, but it seemed she didn't know what to say. Dad just turned away, his face turning as expressionless as a stone mask. Grandma, please don't interfere, Madison tried softly, but her voice lacked confidence. I'm interfering because I've been silent for too long, Grandma replied, her voice sharp as a knife. I've watched you neglect Marilyn for years, justifying it with her independence. But the truth is, you just didn't want to see her, because she didn't fit into your perfect family script. This has to stop. A heavy silence hung in the room. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. It was a feeling of relief. Finally, someone had said out loud what I had carried inside me all these years. Madison sighed, as if she were tired of listening. Grandma, you're exaggerating. We were just trying to throw this party for her. If she doesn't like it, that's her problem. I turned to her, my voice calm but firm. You're right, Madison. It is my problem. And I'll solve it. I looked at my parents. Thanks for the invitation, but I don't see any reason to stay here anymore. Mom took a step toward me. Marilyn, wait, you can't just leave. I can, I replied, turning at the threshold. And I will. I walked out of the kitchen and headed for the door. Voices followed me, but I no longer listened. Grandma trailed behind me. She took my hand as I stood by my car. You did the right thing, sweetie, she said. Her voice was quiet but resolute. Don't let them use you anymore. I nodded, squeezing her hand. Thank you, Grandma. For everything. Sitting in the car, I looked in the rearview mirror. The house was still glowing with lights, the party continuing inside, but it no longer mattered to me. The road lay ahead, and I knew I was heading to a better place. I stood on the porch of my parents' house, holding the phone in my hand. Madison's video, deceptively simple but relentlessly eloquent, kept replaying in my mind over and over. The smirk on her face, the confidence in every movement, it wasn't a mistake. It was a cold-blooded attempt to hurt me. Or worse. The door opened before I could knock. Mom stood in the doorway, her face lit up with a forced joy, as if she were expecting to see anyone but me. "Marilyn, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be resting at the hospital." I stepped inside, ignoring her greeting. "I need to talk to all of you. Right now." Her smile faltered, but she quickly recovered her usual mask of politeness. "Of course, darling, we're all in the living room. Would you like some tea? Maybe some water?" "I don't need anything," I replied, walking deeper into the house. The living room was filled with silence, which immediately enveloped me as I entered. Dad was sitting in his chair, holding a newspaper, pretending to read, although his gaze immediately darted to me. Madison was sprawled on the couch, intently scrolling through her phone, but her posture was too tense to seem natural. I stood in the middle of the room, feeling the adrenaline pulse through my veins. "I need to show you something," I said, pulling out my phone. "And I want you all to see it." Madison raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a lazy smile. "What's this drama now, Marilyn? Are you making a scene again?" I ignored her. Pressing play, I lifted my phone so everyone could see. The silence in the room was so heavy that the sound from the speaker seemed deafening. The video clearly showed Madison standing up, walking to my place at the table, pulling a small jar from her bag, and mixing its contents into my food. Then, she returned to her seat with a self-satisfied grin. When the recording ended, I put my phone down and looked at each of them in turn. Dad had turned pale, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Mom looked stunned, her mouth half open as though she was trying to say something but couldn't find the words. Only Madison didn't look embarrassed. Her eyes narrowed, and her smile turned into a challenge. "It's not what it seems," Mom finally said, her voice tense. "Madison, you couldn't have." "Couldn't have?" I interrupted her, my voice ice cold. The video speaks for itself. She knew about my allergy, knew what could happen. And she did it anyway. "Oh, please," Madison scoffed, her smile returning. "You always blow everything out of proportion." "It was a joke, Marilyn. Just a joke." I took a step forward, looking her directly in the eyes. "A joke?" I almost died, Madison. This wasn't a joke. This was an attempt to kill me. Mom jumped up, her voice rising to a shout. "Marilyn, don't say that about your sister. You don't understand." "Don't understand?" I interrupted. "I understand everything. And I'm not going to take this anymore." Dad stood up, his face turning stone-like. "If you think you can accuse your sister of something so serious." "I don't think I know," I said, pulling out my phone. "And this video is proof. I've already sent it to my lawyer. And to the police." Those words exploded in the room. Mom screamed, her face contorted with horror. Dad stepped toward me, his hands trembling with rage. "You dare to involve the police? How could you do this to your family?" "Family?" I laughed, though the laugh was bitter. "You call this family? You left me by the side, ignored me, used me. And now you're defending her, after what she did? This isn't family. This is a lie." Madison got up from the couch, her voice ringing with fury. "You just can't handle that I'm better than you. This is all because of envy, Marilyn. You've always been jealous of me." I froze, looking at her. Envy? Of her? It wasn't just funny, it was absurd. Envy? You're right, Madison. I envy you. I envy the fact that you never had to fight like I did. The fact that parents always put you first. But you know what I've learned? I've learned to live without all of you. And I'll learn to live after this. Mom broke down in tears, clutching Dad. John, do something. We can't let this destroy our family. But I already knew there was nothing left to destroy here. The family they spoke of existed only in their fantasies. A real family isn't made up of people who share your blood. It's the ones who support you, who stand by you no matter what, who would never hurt you. I turned and walked out of the house. Behind me, I could hear their voices, full of panic and anger, but it no longer mattered. I had the video, the truth was on my side, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my life. The glow of my phone screen bathed the room in soft blue light, reflecting off the walls of my small but cozy home. A message from Lori reminded me that even in the darkest moments, there's always a glimmer of light. I read her words several times, feeling tears well up in my eyes. You're still my favorite cousin. It seemed that in this simple sentence there was more warmth than I had ever received from my family. I turned off the phone and leaned back on the couch, allowing my thoughts to flow freely. There was a strange mix of relief and bitterness in my soul. Relief from finally telling the truth, from breaking free of the vicious cycle of lies and manipulation. Bitterness because I had to do it at the cost of completely severing ties with people I had tried so long to call my family. But Grandma's words still echoed in my head. You are my only breath. They were like balm on wounds that seemed to never heal. Her support gave me the confidence that I wasn't alone, that I still had a real family, even if it wasn't the one I had imagined as a child. The next morning started with more notifications. My colleagues, friends, and even people I hadn't spoken to in a long time continued to express their support. Many shared their experiences of difficult family relationships. Some even said my actions had inspired them to stand up to injustice in their own lives. I read these messages and felt faith in people slowly returning. But not everyone was on my side. Madison didn't stop with her tearful video. She launched a campaign to restore her image in the eyes of family and friends. She claimed it was all a mistake, that she never meant to harm me, and that I was just seeking attention. However, the video spoke for itself. Her attempt seemed pitiful and fake. My phone rang. It was my lawyer. He informed me that the police had started an investigation into my case. On one hand, it was a relief. Justice might prevail. But on the other hand, I knew this was just the beginning of a long and exhausting process. Madison and my parents wouldn't give up without a fight. That evening, I decided to visit Grandma. She insisted that we have dinner at her house. When I entered, I was greeted by the smell of freshly baked bread and her signature apple pie. Her warm smile and strong embrace became a true sanctuary for me. How are you holding up, sweetie? She asked, setting a cup of hot tea in front of me. Honestly? I sighed, feeling the weight of the past few days pressing on my shoulders. I'm tired. But at the same time, I feel free. Grandma nodded, her eyes shining with pride. You did what many are afraid to do. You put yourself first. That's not selfishness, Marilyn. That's self-respect. We talked for a long time, discussing plans for the future. Grandma suggested I temporarily move in with her, so I could feel safe and not be alone during this difficult time. I agreed, knowing her care was exactly what I needed right now. The following days were filled with tasks. I worked, met with my lawyer, and gradually began to rebuild my life. The new chapter of my life was tough, but it was mine. I no longer felt like a prisoner of the past, and that gave me strength. A few weeks later, I received another message from Lori. She invited me to a family dinner organized by Aunt Marjorie. This was the same family that had always supported me, even during the hardest times. I decided to go. The evening was filled with a cozy, almost festive atmosphere. Laughter, warm words, and sincere hugs reminded me that family isn't always made up of those who share your blood. It's those who are ready to lend you a hand, who value you for who you are, not for what you can give. When I got home, I sat down at the table and began to write. The words flowed easily, as if I were spilling onto paper everything that had been building up inside me for years. It wasn't anger or accusations. It was my story. A story of pain, betrayal, but also hope and strength. I finished late at night, feeling how exhaustion gave way to lightness. This time, I was ready. Ready to leave the past behind and build my future on my own terms.